Hello, Ian. How are you?
Okay, thanks, yeah.
Okay, welcome to Channel 1. It's a pleasure to have you here. It's an honor. Okay, so let's go back in the early 70s. Give us a picture from the first steps of the Cherry Red journey.
Well, we came out of a promotion company. We, myself and two friends, used to promote concerts in a place called Malvern in Worcestershire, which is about 150 miles west of London. And in 1977, on New Year's Eve, I was having a celebration drink with Richard, one of my partners in Cherry Red Promotions, and it was his idea to start a record label. And he'd already found a local band called The Tights, because bearing in mind 1977 was pretty much near the beginning of the first wave of punk in the UK. And so what we did was we started a record label, and The Tights were our first signing, and we put the single out in around May, I think it was May 1998.
Yeah.
And it was quite successful within certain boundaries. It sold several thousand, and it got Record of the Week in Record Mirror, which was a weekly music magazine at that time, and was played on Radio 1, John Peel's show, and was a well-regarded single, and that encouraged us to do a second one with The Tights, and to start signing more bands.
Bad Hearts by The Tights.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, must be one of your favorites of all time, I guess.
It is, because it's funny, because the Tights are still going as a band, actually, and they've just recorded 10 new tracks. They sent me copies of the 10 new tracks a couple of weeks ago, and we're probably going to release an album by them later in the year, which is amazing when you think that they first signed for us over 30 years ago, and now 30 years later, we're thinking of doing an album with them.
What about John Peel, Ian? It was a man who cares a lot about independent labels like Cherry Red.
Yeah, well, he was essentially a music fan, of course, and he liked all kinds of interesting music, and he appreciated innovation. He appreciated people doing things on their own and taking chances. And when the whole independent label thing blew open in about 1977 with the first wave of punk, he was one of the few people that straight away was very supportive and would play anything that he thought was good and original and different.
Yeah.
And many bands that have broken through actually owe a great debt to him.
Yeah. Ian, can you tell me some things about the legendary album Pillows and Prayers?
Well, Pillows and Prayers came out, let's see, it must have been I think the end of 1981, or maybe it was 82, I can't remember. Yeah. And what had happened by that time was we'd obviously grown from just having The Tights to start with, and Mike Allway had joined us as A&R man in 1980, and he'd signed a lot of really interesting bands like Monochrome Set and Kevin Coyne and Felt and the Nightingales and the Marine Girls and Ben Watt, had lots of very interesting artists. And Michael had the idea of doing this compilation album, which would sell very cheaply for 99p. That's a little bit less than £1. Bearing in mind most albums in those days were selling in the shops for about £4 or £5, so this was very cheap. And the idea was to do a sampler, so people that weren't that familiar with the label would take the chance, and maybe they knew one or two acts, and they'd buy the album because they liked one or two acts, and then they'd listen to the other acts on the album and hopefully go out and find out more about them.
Yeah.
And the album was very successful. It sold, I think we pressed 10,000 to start with, and they went in about a week, and we ended up selling 120,000 albums in the first year, which was very good sales for that kind of release.
Ian, can you give us a picture about the music industry in England nowadays? Too many changes, maybe a new kind of market. Tell us your point of view.
You're talking about nowadays? Well, it's a really interesting time because we all know in the world there's a recession that's just beginning to really bite deep now. But of course, the music business has had a recession for 3 or 4 years. So in our own way, we've had time to prepare for this to some extent. And so a lot of companies, especially independent companies, have been quite careful last 2, 3, 4 years with their expenditure. They're just focusing on what they feel they're good at. And with our case, we're pretty much focusing on catalogue these days. We still put out between 40 and 50 albums a month. And most of those albums sell fine over time. And they're basically aimed at collectors. And the labels that do that, I don't just mean catalogue, but focus on what they know and what they're good at, they're actually doing okay. We all had a bit of a difficult time, all the labels that went through the biggest independent distributor in the UK, which was Pinnacle, because they actually went bankrupt beginning of December. So it's been a pretty tough time since then for many people. We've had to find new distributors and reorganize ourselves. But I think independent labels as such are quite well prepared, and I think it's the major companies that are finding it harder. Companies like EMI are finding it very hard at the moment.
Ian, is there any secret on the Cherry Red? I mean, it's a small miracle to survive all those years doing your own thing by your rules, in a way, you know. Tell us some things about your journey so far.
Well, we've been going over 30 years, and it's been very much a case of trying to be ahead of what's happening. And I suppose we've had really 3 phases with the label. We had the first phase of about 10 years where we were pretty much signing new artists, signing them for 3, 4 or 5 album deals, putting out a single and an album, and working with them stage by stage. And the artists were prepared to stay with us for the long haul. They were prepared to work hard and gig and just try and build their career step by step. And I'd say that worked for about 10 years. And then the rules started to change. A lot of the major companies started new labels that on the face of it look like independent labels. That a separate name and a separate A&R person and a separate address. But they were in fact funded by major companies. So it became harder for us. And so that took us on to phase 2, which was pretty much starting more to look at catalogue releases. At that time, then, we bought up the rights to various independent labels that weren't operating anymore, like Flick Knife Records and Red Rhino Records and Intape Records and Midnight Music. And we were looking at their catalogues and just putting some great repackaging out. And that kept us going for a few more years. And then about, again, 10 years ago, we changed again slightly. And there we started to have our own, start a lot more different labels, which were ultimately controlled or owned by Cherry Red. Labels like RPM, which is run by Mark Stratford, or Revola, which is run by Joe Foster, Esoteric, run by Mark Powell. And these labels, again, they're all catalogue labels, and they're run in a way independently, A&R-wise, at Cherry Red, but they all go through the Cherry Red system. And then we started a book division a few years ago. We put out some DVDs, and we now have Cherry Red TV, which is a very interesting, project.
Really.
So we've just tried to stay ahead of what's happening, and that's the key, really.
That's important. Ian, let's move to Manchester for a while. Can you tell me some of your memories maybe about Tony Wilson in memory, you know, the Factory Records man? Yeah,
I didn't know Tony that well. I knew him a little bit. Obviously, he was based in Manchester, and I only got to see him now and again. But he was a very creative person, a lot of innovation and good ideas, and again, ahead of his time in many respects.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, and thank you very much for your time for this interview.
Okay.